Anyway, I'm working on a Windows machine here, so please be a little bit forgiving. Can you all see the screen? Give us a thumbs up. Perfect. Let me put a chat window up. If you've got questions as we go along, please throw them into chat. Sorry if the audio is not fantastic. It's the best I could give you for the time being. All right, so situation normal, everything must change. What I'm going to talk about is the issue of strategy. Then we'll get on to maps. Then we'll get on to being trapped by context. Then we'll get on to patterns of change. Now, I've had to modify this, so I've thrown in a couple of other subjects. One is serverless, so I thought I'd cover that. Oops. And one is, the things that we often get wrong. Now, can I just, is thumbs up? Can you all see the map? Is all the transitions all working fine? Oh, I'm not seeing any thumbs up. Yes, okay, thank you. All right. So this all starts for me. This whole story of strategy starts back in a company called Fatango. Many years ago, it was an online photo service. I dealt with, I had about 16 different lines of business actually. On a single sign-on service, print service, as well as the online photo service and a mailing system, etc. But it had a problem. And the problem for the company was that not that its revenue wasn't growing, it was growing, and it was actually a very profitable company. But the problem for this company was the CEO. The CEO was what I would call a fake CEO. They were making it up as they went along. Now, we used to have strategy statements, things like this. Our strategy is customer focus. We will lead an innovative effort in the market through our use of agile techniques and open source. But this was, we'd heavily adopted open source and things like extreme programming. But this was literally pinched from other companies and just words changed. And I know this, and I know the CEO was a fake CEO because I was the CEO. I had no idea what I was doing. And nonetheless, there I was in charge of this company. So I was sort of like a little bit desperate, worried that people would eventually rumble that I was all making it up. So I used to go around listening to other CEOs talking about strategy. I used to record the common words they would say. And these are the sort of, I've done this every couple of years. So, you'd hear these common words, things like, well, this is actually 2013, 2014. People would talk about digital business, big data, disruptive, innovative, collaborative, competitive advantage, ecosystem, open source, blah, blah, blah. I call these business level abstractions of a healthy strategy, or BLAs for short. Anyway, if you did this today, you just hear, other BLAs, things like, I don't know, AI, machine learning, blockchain. You can't do anything without a bit of blockchain these days. And so what I did was I took these common BLAs, and I took the strategy documents and vision statements that I kept on reading, and I created what I called the BLA template. So this is the BLA template. Our strategy is BLA. We will lead a BLA effort of the market through our use of BLA and BLA to build a BLA. And then what you do is you just smash the BLAs and the BLA templates together and auto generate a bunch of random strategies. And I've done this many times. So this is an example, complete random gibberish. Our strategy is innovative digital business. We will lead a growth effort of the market through our use of customer focus, competitive advantage, and disruptive social media to build a collaborative revolution. So utter gibberish, just random words smashed into a template. But this was the level of strategy that I was playing at back in 2005 because I had no idea, well, 2004, because I had no idea what I was doing. So I've sent these around. Last time I did this, I got about 400 responses of 3 basic types. So I sent those strategy, those statements around, and the most common one was, this is the exact wording from our business plan. Second was, I've seen 2 of these used already, and the third, my favorite, is are you for hire? So actually a friend of mine's put this all online. This is strategy as a service. If you ever need a strategy, just type in the URL at the bottom. It will make you one based upon nothing whatsoever. It's all, if it makes you feel better, you can pretend there's AI, machine learning, and blockchain if necessary, or big data behind it, but it's just random words inserted into a template. So our strategy is collaborative. We will lead an open effort of the market through our use of big data and social media to build a digital business. Just pure gibberish. Anyway, so that was the position I was in 2004, roughly, running a company, not having a clue what I was doing, not really getting much help anywhere else, reading loads of books on strategy, getting nowhere, and then I came across the work of Sun Tzu. I'm actually a bookseller. I'd gone in and was sort of like a little bit desperate, and the bookseller said, well, have you read Sun Tzu's The Art of War? I went, no. So he said, well, buy 2 copies. She said, buy 2 copies. And I asked her, why, and she told me they're different translations. So I actually bought 2 copies of this book, different translations. And in the reading of the second one, I noticed there were 5 factors that seemed to matter in competition. 1, understand your purpose, your moral imperative. 2, understand the landscape you're competing in. 3, understand the climactic pattern, so that's how the landscape is changing. Then you need to understand doctrines or principles of organization, and finally, you're into the whole area of leadership and gameplay. And it's a cycle, and the more you get around this, the better you get. And then I came across John Boyd, a US Air Force pilot, and John Boyd, very simple, you've got the game. The first thing you need to do is observe the environment. So that's what landscape and climatic patterns are about, understanding the environment and how it's changing, focusing on situational awareness. Then you need to orientate yourself around it. That's what principles and doctrine are about. And finally, you need to decide where you're going to act, and then you act. And that's where leadership and gameplay comes into place. So I overlaid those 2. John Boyd's, it's actually called the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. And then people would say, well, that's all very well and good, but what matters is the why. Well, there are 2 whys. The why of purpose, moral imperative. If I'm playing chess, I want to win the game. And the why of movement. Do I move this piece or that piece? Do I take this action or that action? And those are fundamentally different whys. And it's a cycle. The more you go around this, the better you get. So pretty simple. So this then led me on to maps. The reason being is that if I look at that strategy cycle, at the very heart of it was this understanding of the landscape. And that's what maps are all about, teaching you about the landscape. That's why we use them in military engagements. So I started off looking at military history, and this is one of my favorite examples, the Battle of Thermopylae. So Themistocles is an ancient politician, Greek general. Greece at the time was independent city-states, but they worked together in a time of a severe calamity. And they had a calamity heading their way. The Persians were invading. Now, we think there are about 140 to 170,000 Persians. Nobody's quite sure what the number is. But what Themistocles decided to do was to block off the Straits of Artemisium with the navy, force the Persians along a coastal road into a narrow pass known as Thermopylae, where a smaller number of troops could defend against a larger force until the rest of the troops rallied. Now, the Greeks had about 4,000 soldiers available, including 300 Spartans. And that's where we get the story of the 300 from. Now, I want you to imagine that you're members of the Athenian city-state. And I'm Themistocles. I'll take the role of the general. And I'm giving you purpose and moral imperative, but I say to you, we want to defend against the invading Persian horde. So the why, or the why of purpose. But then I say to you, I don't understand the landscape, I don't understand the environment, I have no map, but have no fear, for I have created a SWOT diagram. So, strengths: a well-trained Spartan army, high level of motivation not to become a Persian slave. Weaknesses: the ephors might stop the Spartans turning up. A truckload of Persians are turning up. Opportunities: get rid of the Persians, get rid of the Spartans. We're Athenian, actually. We hate the Spartans. And threats: the Persians get rid of us, and the oracle says a really dodgy film might be produced a few thousand years later. Okay, so the question you need to ask is, what would you use to communicate and determine strategy in battle? Position and movement described by some form of map or some sort of magic framework like a SWOT diagram. Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, you never use a SWOT diagram, a magic framework. And of course you'd use a map. But the problem for me was when I looked at business, all I was doing was SWOT diagrams. So I started to, this gave me quite a bit of concern. So I started to look into the issue of maps because we had maps. We had systems maps, we had mind maps, we had business process maps, lots of different maps. But they all turned out to have one thing in common, which was none of them were maps. They're all graphs. Now, to understand the difference between a map and a graph, well, very simply, the three diagrams at the top are graphs, and they're identical. Nottingham, London, Dover, Nottingham, London, Dover, Nottingham, London, Dover. Okay? But the three diagrams at the bottom, they're maps, and they're all completely different. Nottingham, London, Dover, Nottingham, London, Dover, Nottingham, London, Dover. Entirely different. Now, the difference between a map and a graph is that in a map, space has meaning. So if you take something like I don't know, a mind map, and you take a component and move it a little bit, move it a lot, does it change the meaning of the map? If it doesn't, it's not a map, it's a graph. So, for example, if you take a map of the world and you take, I don't know, Australia and shift it next to the UK, does that change the meaning of the map? Of course it does. But that is the distinction between a map and a graph. Graphs and space have no meaning, but maps, space has meaning. That's why it has context. Okay, so where does that come from? So if you look at a geographical map, in order to give space meaning, you need three characteristics. You need a point of reference, like an anchor north. You need position of pieces relative to the anchor. So this Thebes is north of Athens, slightly west of Athens, etc. It's south of Thermopylae. But you also not only need anchor and position, you need movement and consistency of movement. So if I go north, I'm actually going north. I'm not going south or east or west. It's not variable. It's not changing. North is north, south is south. Okay. So I decided to create a map of my business. And to show you an example map, I'm going to use a cup of tea, because I like cups of tea. So we start off at the top with two anchors, the business and the public here. Here the business has a need to sell cups of tea, and the public has a need, we hope, to consume cups of tea. Now that gives us our anchors. Now position, what you've got is a chain of needs. So the public needs a cup of tea, that needs tea, it needs a cup, it needs hot water needs cold water, it needs kettle needs power. So what you've got is a chain of needs. Now to the consumer, the public, the cup of tea is far more visible to them than the power used to heat the kettle, used to heat the hot water, make the hot water. So within this chain of needs, you've got this concept of visibility, which is equivalent to distant. Things that are far away are less visible. On the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you can see it says invisible to visible value chain. That's pure scaffolding, actually. It's only there for beginners. Once you start mapping, you throw that axis away because it's totally meaningless. The chain is actually, visibility is within the chain itself. All right, so I've got anchor position, but I also need movement. So movement's a little bit tricky. It's easier in geographical terms, because when we move, say, from Thebes to Thermopylae, the chances of Thermopylae moving during that journey are very low. It doesn't mean land masses don't move. I mean, if we go 200 million years ago, we've got Pangaea, but they do it at a very, very slow pace. The problem with technology is technology moves a lot quicker, and so it tends to change its nature a lot faster, which means we have to measure movement in terms of sense of change. And the way we do that is with this axis at the bottom, where we talk about the genesis of novel and new, custom-built examples, product and rental services, commodity and utility services. So what we're measuring there is how evolved a component is. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about physical activities or practices or data or knowledge, they all evolve through the same patterns. We just give slightly different labels to them. So now what I've got is anchor, position, and movement, because I put my components down, and then I just put them where I think they are in terms of how evolved. Now, the beauty of this is I can look at this, and I can now see your assumptions, and I can question and challenge your assumptions. For example, why did you put kettle in custom built? Surely kettle's a commodity. So we can have that conversation. But interestingly, and most importantly, it gets rid of a lot of the politics. So normally what happens in a world of stories is you have a storyteller. And if you challenge the story, you're actually challenging the person telling the story. And the reason for this is simply that we spend vast sums of money telling people that your story would have succeeded if only you'd been a better storyteller. And so people get personally involved. And this idea that great storytellers is what you need as leaders has sort of become enshrined in business. And so when somebody tells you a story, they're actually personally involved in that story. And by getting them to put it in a map, one of the beauties is I'm not challenging you anymore by challenging your story. I'm actually challenging the map. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm saying the map is wrong. So we nicely escape a lot of those political issues. All right. So I'm going to show you some of the basic problems, what I call trapped by context. This is an enormous field, by the way, so this is a very gentle introduction. So this is a particular insurance company. Now, this insurance company had a problem. It needs compute, order server comes into goods in. I'm going to use engineering compute examples. A lot of the stuff I do is nation-state competition well, all sorts of wonderful areas. But I'm going to just use a few computing examples. So they order compute, order server comes into goods in, they modify, mount, and rack it. So now they had a bottleneck in terms of the modifications of servers, so they'd invested 6 months, looked at potential solutions, including the use of robotics. They were about to spend several million in terms of, well, many, many million in terms of implementing robotics. And what they're trying to do is get rid of this bottleneck in their process flow. Very simple. Now, you can't go and challenge this. You can't say to somebody, why are you investing in robotics? They've built the story and everything else. You'll get into a fight. So what I asked them to do was map it. And this literally took them, 10, 15 minutes. They went user, compute, computing product, order server goods in, that's all commodity type stuff, rack, mount, and modify. I looked at this, and it was, I'm going to disagree that they put compute as a product. I think it's more of a utility. But I looked at this, and I just said, why have you got rack in custom built? And it turns out they had a company that built their racks for them, so they were custom made. To which the question then I asked was, well, what are the modifications you're doing to servers? Well, the servers they bought didn't fit the racks, and therefore they had to take cases off, drill new holes, add new plates in order to get them to fit the racks. And this is what they need robotics for. Now, of course, at this point, somebody just went, why don't we use standard racks? Now, you might say, well, that's an obvious thing to do. But what you have to remember is these people are trapped by history, trapped by stories. At some point, this custom-built rack made sense. And that's just become part of the way they do things. People just get trapped by this context all the time. And until such time as you can see it, there wasn't an effective way of challenging it, which is why they're not daft. They'd spent 6 months working on this project, came up with robotics. It was 15 minutes, and they go, we need to use standard racks. And this is the most common problem I see in business. People focusing on improving process flow when they should be focusing on evolutionary flow. I mean, hundreds of millions, if not billions, get wasted on people trying to make totally ineffective systems more efficient, improving the process flow. So probably one of the most common problems I see. Of course, once you realize rack is a commodity, then we can have a discussion about compute, and really compute should be a utility. That's the process flow you need, which is cloud first. Okay, so another example. The first one was private company. This is a government agency. You have a department requires a count. It's a number. It comes from an agency, and this agency gets that number by weighing paper forms. We fill in so many paper forms, it's actually cheaper to weigh them to work out the count than it is to physically count them. So you weigh, we've got 600 kilograms or whatever, 100 kilograms of paper forms is that many forms. All right. So they were doing a digital transformation effort, as in they wanted to make the weighing scales more connected so there was no manually transferring information. Okay, very good. Quick question asked was, where do the paper forms come from? They come from goods in. Go and ask goods in. Where do they come from? They come from distribution sites all over the country. Great. Go and ask a distribution site where the paper forms coming from. We're printing them out. Where are you printing them out from? Our CRM systems, which our users fill in online. So the users fill in online a form, which is then printed out at multiple different places and shipped to this group, which then weighs the number of forms to work out the number of forms the users have filled in order to produce the count. Now, at some point, this made sense, but of course, what's happened is paper forms have evolved and become electronic records, and the systems around it haven't. So what we've got are people optimizing at the bottom, optimizing within those distribution sites to more efficiently print out paper forms, and people at the top optimizing to more efficiently weigh paper forms. And in fact, all of this could be replaced with select count start from table. So does the digital transformation effort make sense? No. But, they are just trying to improve their process flow. Sensible thing to do. The problem is, as I said, this has evolved. That is the process flow. It should be a count of electronic records from CRM. You don't need printing facilities and all the other stuff. Packaging, distribution, weighing machines, etc. Again, these people aren't daft. It's just people being tracked by context. So then you start to get onto patterns. Once you start to observe the environment, you start to learn patterns of change. Okay? Now, there's three basic areas of patterns. There are climatic patterns. These are patterns which change your environment regardless of what you do. So supply and demand competition, for example, will constantly force things to evolve. There's nothing you can do to stop that. That's just going to happen. Now, there's about 30 of those, and they're useful for anticipation of change. Then there's principles, doctrine of organization, the doctrine, the principles of organization. There's about 40 of those. Now, they're again patterns, but these are ones which you can decide to use, and they turn out to be universally useful. So things like focusing on users, focusing on user needs, removing bias and duplication. I mean, these come from mapping. Anyway, there's 40 of those. Like the climatic patterns, most people are pretty much oblivious to the lot. And then there's context-specific forms of gameplay. So this is how you manipulate a market to your favor. So there's all sorts of different ways. One of my use of constraints, fear, uncertainty, doubt. One of my favorites, open plays, which are a great way of industrializing components. Make very little difference in the genesis of the novel new, but great for industrializing. Anyway, there's over 100 of those. Again, most people are completely oblivious. And you would be oblivious to this if you can't see the landscape. So back in Tango, this is myself and a chap called James Duncan. We sit down and drew a map of the photo service. So this was about 2005. We had online photo storage, online image manipulation, print. This is a simplified version, compute, data center. And we just started applying the patterns we knew. So we knew, first of all, that everything would evolve. So eventually the compute would become a utility, and the runtime would be a utility. We knew another pattern was that past success would breed inertia. One of my favorite examples of this is Blockbuster and Netflix. And the reason being quite simple. I mean, if you ask who was first with a website, it was Blockbuster. Who was first with video ordering online, that would be Blockbuster. And who was first with experimenting with video streaming, that would be Blockbuster. But who went bankrupt first, that would be Blockbuster as well. The thing about Blockbuster is it didn't die, I suppose, because it lacked innovation. Quite the opposite. It had huge amounts of innovation. The problem is it had past success. That past success, particularly late fees, which were to do with people forgetting to bring back their cassettes, that past success created inertia to change within the organization. So it wasn't lack of innovation that took it down. It was past success and inertia caused by that. So that's quite common, particularly when we shift from product to sort of more commodity, which is why the new entrants in the commodity phases tend to be not encumbered by pre-existing business models. So like a bookseller for compute shifting from products to utility. Okay, and the next pattern you notice is componentization effects. So as components become more efficient, they enable innovation. They enable what we call the adjacent unexplored. So components become more efficient, like electricity becomes a utility. You see explosion of higher order systems, radio, television, teletyping, whatever. And they create new industries, new sources of value, new sources of worth. Okay? Oops. And so the point about this is, I mean, that's 1, 2, 3 patterns. As I said, there's 30-odd patterns, climatic patterns. Once you apply them to that, they enable us to ask that question of where to invest. Do I want to build the first runtime as a utility, the first compute as a utility, maybe build something novel and new based upon somebody else building utilities, or maybe differentiating on the core photo service? Now, at the time, Fatango was a very, very small, limited company with lots of rules about having to be profitable all the time and restrictions on growth because we were owned by a large company. So we had to make our choices of where could we bet. But you can also manipulate the space as well. As I said, you could do open plays. So what we knew looking at this is, what we decided to do was build the world's first serverless environment. I'd anticipated that somebody was going to do compute as a utility. I thought it was going to be Google. Turned out it was Amazon next year. We'd already virtualized most of our data centers anyway, so we wouldn't have the capital to go up against the likes of Google. It turned out it was Amazon. We wouldn't have had the capital to go up against them. But what we could do is build the first ever runtime as a utility or serverless environment. And so we built this environment as Zimkey, build entire applications, JavaScript front and back end, with billing per function, all that sort of good stuff, lots of services. And of course, the intention then people would build on top, and then there were ways of us mining that metadata to grow. Anyway, Amazon launched, so we quickly repositioned it on Amazon, and it was great. It was growing. This is us in Euroscon back in 2006. It was wonderful seeing people building and starting to build entire applications in the space. Unfortunately, parent company had a consultancy firm come in, and the things that I was very much focused on, the use of the runtime as a utility, or cloud as serverless as you would call it now, the use of mobile phones as cameras within mobile phones, which was another area that we'd been looking into. And another particular favorite of mine was 3D printing. Apparently they were not the future. The future was all about new forms of television and 3D TVs. So unfortunately the whole lot was shut down, despite being profitable and everything else, despite being having these services. And I believe we invested $1 billion in 3D TV, which was spectacular. So I went to a company called Ubuntu because I had the choice of shutting it all down and taking a very cushy role as a VP, and I thought, damn that. So I left, I resigned, and a friend of mine, Mark Shuttleworth, runs a company called Canonical, which provides Ubuntu. So I went there in 2008, quickly mapped out the space, had a long chat with Mark. First 3 or 4 people I met, I said, well, I'm going to take you into the cloud, and they were all like, oh, that's just a fad, and blah. Right, fair enough. So we used the maps to explain, compute was going to a utility. We needed to own the guest OS. We knew there'd be a co-evolved management tool and practice, but we didn't know what it was going to be called DevOps. I just put that afterwards. But we knew we'd have to invest there. And so we knew we wanted to capture any movements in the platform, in those new practices, any people building on top. We wanted to own it. And of course, I'd also mapped out our competitors, and we wanted to reinforce their inertia to change as well. So I did a lot of stuff about security updates should be free in the cloud, mainly because I knew, opposing salespeople, the bonuses depending upon selling security updates. So we were able to play a lot of different games. So it took us about 18 months. It was about £500,000. This is us in 2008, 2-3% the operating system market against Red Hat and Windows, etc. By 2010, we were 70% of all cloud. If you were around in those days in the industry, you might have noticed how it was all Red Hat Windows, and the cloud, it suddenly became all Ubuntu. Well, you were mapped. And then I got into the better for less. So I started writing papers with good friends of mine, people like Liam Maxwell, Jerry Fishenden, and others. This was all about transformation of government. Better for less paper itself had a lot of mapping concepts in there. Unfortunately, when I started mapping, I sort of assumed everybody else in the world knew how to map because I mapped. And it took me at least 6 years to really twig that people didn't know how to map. But there are a lot of mapping concepts in the Better for Less paper, and of course that led to helped in the formation of something called spend control, and helped in the creation of or the formation of GDS as well. Okay. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about doctrine here. These are universally useful patterns. Whoops. So if I look at the screen, the map here, basically when something evolves, it becomes more efficient. We know because of componentization, it enables new higher order systems to appear which evolve. Now, it doesn't matter what it is, money, penicillin, or computing. As it evolves, its characteristics change. It goes from this chaotic, uncertain world to this more industrialized, standard, dull, boring. It could be computing, it could be money, it could be penicillin, going from the novel and new penicillin, we don't quite know what it does, to the sort of more generic. Okay. Now, because of that, there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all methodology. So extreme programming, if we go back to Kent Beck's work, is all about reducing the cost of change. So that's where it specializes. Whereas in the middle, you're more about lean. So Scrum plus MVP plus other artifacts as well. So you're focused on learning and reducing waste. Whereas on the right-hand side, you're all about reducing deviation. So you don't, it's not about change. You don't want change at all. And so things like Six Sigma or outsourcing to some sort of utility provider makes sense. Of course, it doesn't matter which conference I go to. Six Sigma conference, if I say, Six Sigma doesn't fit everywhere, it's always burn him heretic. If I go to an Agile conference and say Agile doesn't fit everywhere, it's always burn him heretic, and same with a lean as well. I just get used to this. So I'll give you an example. This is HS2 high-speed rail. This is James Finley. Now, there's one bit of HS2 which I particularly like, which is the building of the entire railway in a virtual world, which is what James did. I like this because it ended up in the Public Accounts Committee being praised for being ahead of schedule and under budget, which is pretty exceptional for most things to do with HS2. So here's James's problem. This is the systems diagram for how to build HS2 in a virtual world. His problem was, well, okay, which bits do I outsource? What do I build in-house? Okay. Do I use a mix of methods? The problem with using a mix of methods, maybe outsource this, build in-house here, there's 307 million possible permutations, which is why it's easy to say, oh, outsource the whole lot. Okay, so how do you work through this? So what James did was create a map, and he sent this map to me. It was on paper, 2012. We just tidied it up a little bit, had a discussion, and now it becomes simple. You outsource the stuff on the right, you build off-the-shelf products in the middle, you build agile in-house techniques on the left-hand side. Understanding that as things evolve, the methods and techniques we're going to apply will change as well. Now, of course, this is not popular with vendors. Vendors would prefer you, obviously, to outsource the whole lot. Now, normally you wouldn't have a map anyway, so you might get sucked into doing this. If you do outsource the whole lot, so this is the mapping version which you've outsourced the whole lot, you're bound to want a specification document, lots of SWOT diagrams or whatever, because you want to know what's being delivered. The net result of outsourcing the whole lot and writing a contract is pretty simple. The stuff on the right-hand side will get efficiently delivered, but the stuff on the left-hand side, which we can't actually define, it will change, will incur excessive change control costs. So your project is almost certainly guaranteed to spiral out of control. And the best thing about this, of course, is when you get into a fight with a vendor, you can point at all the stuff that's been efficiently delivered on the right-hand side, and all the stuff which incurred the costs is on the left-hand side. And so then say it's all your fault because you didn't know what you wanted. It's easy. The worst thing that can happen is somebody on your own team starts going, well, next time we need to specify better. I mean, that's guaranteed disaster for the future. Now, people will then say to me, oh, but, Agile or Six Sigma or Lean doesn't matter. We'll evolve to fit everywhere. No, it won't. Just to explain why. Genesis Custom Built Product Commodity. When we talk about practice, we normally go novel, emerging, good, and best. It's just different labels for the different stages. So Agile, as in extreme programming, has evolved to be good, verging on best practice for the development of some novel and new thing, like teleportation, say. But that thing will evolve itself. And so Lean, Scrum MVP and other artifacts, has evolved to be good for development of that thing as a product. Six Sigma has evolved to be best practice for building that thing as a utility, reducing all that deviation. Now here's the problem. What you've got are three things with the same meaning. We call them project methods. But in fact, what they are three evolving competencies, all with the same meaning of project methods. Now we've got a single meaning, as in teleportation, but we've got three material instances. Teleportation, when we first do it, if we ever do, as a product, as more utility, ubiquitous, etc. And each competency has evolved to be good at one particular material instance. And what people keep on trying to do is take, I don't mean to pick on Agile, Ken Beck's a good friend, so we'll take XP and we'll just go, we'll make it fit everywhere, okay? And they do that by co-opting the practices of the other techniques. And then what happens is when you use the technique and it fails, you get told you used the wrong bits. Unfortunately, this is going on in the Agile world. So it was focused on people over process, which is exactly what the sort of values that you need in that uncharted space on the left-hand side. But it's now getting to the point that it's more process over people. You use the wrong bits of Agile. Terrible shame. I mean, anyway, James Finley has moved on. He's now doing all sorts of interesting stuff for the RNLI, using mapping to save lives and things like that. I love this sort of stuff. I like the stuff which saves lives, reduces criminal activity, etc. So to give you an example of this, I'm going to take a self-driving car. I'm going to pretend you're all from finance, so I'm going to give you a systems diagram for a self-driving car, which I've translated into Elvish. That's what it looks like. And now, because I'm IT, I want us to work together. I want us to collaborate, so I'm going to ask you a question. Should we outsource, build our own A? Should we outsource, build our own B? Give you a second to look at it while you decide. These are the sorts of decisions we put people under. Now I'll give you exactly the same diagram, but in mapping format. And ask you again, should we outsource, build our own A? Should we outsource, build our own B? Now it becomes a lot easier. Okay. Once you put in the back in English, you'll find that A is GPS, for example. Fortunately, we didn't try and build our own, except for, unfortunately, we seem to be. Anyway, long story. So I started off with strategy. I talked about maps. I talked about being trapped by context. I talked about the basic patterns. It's very simple with mapping. I mean, start by looking at the landscape. Use that as a process of being able to challenge others. The more you do that, the more you'll learn patterns. And there's an entire, it's all Creative Commons, help yourself. So with practice, you'll get better at this. You can then use patterns for anticipation. You can start using doctrine for how you organize and structure yourself. And eventually, over time, you can start using the gameplay to do, what we call strategy. Don't start there, though. I mean, everybody wants to rush in. Oh, I want to do strategy. It's a bit like playing chess, and there's somebody who doesn't even know how the pieces move or what the board is, but they want to dive in and do strategy. I mean, it's just like, you got to do the basics first. Okay, so at this point, 45. What we can do is we can do some Q&A, or there's other bits I can talk about, serverless and things go wrong, etc. But I thought do you have any questions? Whoops, I keep on jumping slides. Oh, Lee Rickler, yes, that's my daughter in this photo. Hello, Lee. Yes. John, me and Lee used to work together at the Tango. Participants, can I see? Any questions? Anybody want to raise anything at all? How to choose what to put on a map. Oh, that's a really interesting one. By the way, I don't have the, I can't seem to control of the, I'm running on a Windows machine. My apologies for that. So I can't see the panel, which enables me to unmute or mute people. If people, I'm perfectly happy for people to be unmuted and dive in. There's only 23 of us. So how to choose what to put on a map? Well, one of the key things about mapping is you start with thinking about who the users are. So I sat with the Crown Prosecution Service. No, it's the Crown. Oh, I'll remember the group in a minute. But they're involved in the judiciary system and also the running of prisons as well. And we started off thinking about who the users were, and so you had the regulators, and you had the public and government. And it took a long time before people realized the prisoners were actually a user as well, which was always an interesting, enlightening moment. So you start off by, first of all, identifying who the users are, and then thinking about what their needs are. And then thinking about, okay, those things, those needs, what sort of capabilities, what sort of things do we need in order to provide that? And then you start building these chains, and often these chains are overlapping. And what you're then trying to do is get a view of a landscape or environment. You're often trying to look into a particular space. So you'll often find the maps get very busy, so you'll throw things off and put things back on, etc., until you think you've got an understanding of what that landscape looks like. And I've done this from the UN reducing global poverty all the way down to, that also involves many components, including all-weather roads, and that leads all the way down to the National Statistics Organization. So once you've got a map, the first thing you do with it is you share it with someone else. And that's probably the single most important part, because the real value of mapping is not the map, it's the process of mapping itself. So you share it with someone else. because that allows them to challenge your assumptions. To look at what you've done and point out where your weaknesses are, where you're missing components, etc. And so you use that to help refine your understanding and offer space. So it's like the cup of tea. It's like, why have we got custom-built kettles? Or the racks, why have we got custom-built racks? So the first step is thinking about the user. The next thing is understanding the chain. The next thing is sharing and allowing other people to challenge your assumptions. That's when the real power comes from. So how do you choose? It's in that process. It's like mapping a landscape for the first time. You have to go and explore it. It's as simple as that. But it's really important to have experience of that space as well. I suppose like geographical maps, it's pretty impossible to map Paris if you've never been to Paris. Even if you're in Paris and you've just been there for a bit, you're going to map it. You've got to go and explore. Next one. Is there an evolutionary step beyond commodity? In the utility computer, there is a move to edge or a hyper-distributed system. Okay, so what generally tends to happen is as things evolve, we move up the stack. So like electricity enables, radio computing. Computing evolved, enabling higher order systems as well, and things like Netflix. So we're moving constantly up the stack, further and further up the stack. So generally what tends to happen is things lower down the stack just become less visible. They disappear from mind. They're often there in some highly industrialized form that we've forgotten about, basically. So it's like your mobile phone. You wouldn't believe it, but you can actually make phone calls on your mobile phone. I mean, and the capability is still there. I don't know, I must admit, how many people actually these days use it to make phone calls? I'm sure some people do. I'm sure it's declining. But the capability is still there. It's just become less and less visible, less and less important. Things, in terms of things dying off, things die off much quicker in the genesis phase when things are novel and new. As things evolve, they tend to become more stable, but also more invisible. So if I just go back and I'll take this map here. Oops. If I annotate. So if I, Simon just cannot draw for his, come on. Right, Simon's terrible at drawing. Lee Rickler will tell you that. That's why Lee used to do all the design, because Simon was completely, actually rubbish. So, over here, things die much more frequently. Than over here. The frequency of death is much greater, I suppose like that. But what happens is things on the right become less visible, whereas things on the left are highly visible, or tend to be. Do you follow versioning or evolutionary maps in some way, or just keep them as working document? Now that's really interesting. What I tend to do is what we call pre-mortem, post-mortem. So when I'm looking at a project, I like to do a pre-mortem of the project using the map, and then using the pattern to anticipate how we think we're going to change, and from there work out what we're going to do. And then after that, do a post-mortem. So we're going to do the stuff, and then do a post-mortem, to see what on the map we got right and what we got wrong. Because that's the way, basically, you learn patterns. Now, one of the key things is there's no time on a map. So the only way you see time is through the map itself changing. So you have to do some sort of versioning, keep some sort of record of this was it at this date, this was it at this date, etc. So the only way you can really learn patterns of change. Right, for someone new to this area of mapping, where would you recommend as the place to start, read, or practice? Okay, So one of the things is you'll find there's an entire 600-page book, which is unfinished. It's about 19 chapters. I promise at some point, I've been promising. I started writing that damn thing over, over a decade ago. But I promise I will at one point finish it. But 600 pages will give you an introduction into mapping. And the latest incarnation is on medium.com/Wardley maps. And you'll also find there's an entire community around mapping. So if you go it's either list or lists. Right, I think it's list.wardleymaps.com. That takes you to an awesome list, which is a GitHub awesome list maintained by John Grant. And it has links to people doing videos. It's all Creative Commons share alike, so people have done training courses. There's videos, there's examples, maps. If you're in Belgrade, they do what are called battle camps, which are competitive mapping. They actually have maps and they do competitive gameplay against scenario plan against each other. There's map camp in London, there's map camps, there's lots of them around the world, lots in Germany, Australia, places like that. And there's a couple of universities. I mean, I'm doing a day at LSE. It's also taught elective at Harvard Kennedy. It was at Cambridge, I believe it's now at Exeter. It's being taught by Mark Thompson and various other places as well, UCL and other places. They teach bits of mapping. So, but yeah, a simple thing, just look for Wardley Maps. Go medium.com will give you an introduction, but the list, wardleymaps.com, that'll take you to a Slack channel and all that sort of stuff where you'll find an entire community. I mean, Map Camp last year, I mean, this was me just saying I'm going to a pub, and we ended up with a theatre and 800 people, so it's spreading. Okay, let me see if I've missed any other question. Is there any evolutionary step beyond commodity? No, the things just generally become invisible. What other books would you recommend alongside The Art of War? There you are. I'm going to recommend Eric Schon's book, The Art of Strategy, only because it has huge numbers of maps in it. I like maps. It's my maps. But Eric has written a book, Steps Towards Business Agility. Gosh, I read so many different books, and they're all useful in different ways. In terms of strategy books, but read a copy of The Art of War. Once you've read it, find another translation, read that. It's what I'll say. How to choose what to put on a map. Okay, let's have a look. Yes, we've heard that before. Finishing your book. Yes, I'm sorry. Leo. Yeah, I know I've been terrible. I get so much stick about finishing it. The thing is, it's all Creative Commons. So other people have, they've asked me, can I take that book and publish it? And, you can take it, finish it off, publish it, do what you want with it. I'm perfectly happy, as long as it helps expand and grow the field. And there's a wonderful community, a real community of sharing around mapping, which I absolutely love. I mean, Kat Sweetle talks about it democratizing strategy, as in enabling people to open the curtains and understand what is going on in the industry. And that you'll find there is a map of mapping. I mapped mapping a long time ago. And one of my intentions behind that is that. At what point do you bring in people change required to shift organizations? Well, the thing is, with a map, you can start looking at, the sort of people that you require, etc. So let me just erase all of this. Sorry about the scribbling sound. Let's change colour. I should have picked something else. Right. So, for example, if I know things are going to evolve, say, over here, I know it's going to enable the appearance of higher order systems. I can use this to anticipate, I'm going to need people over here, I'm going to need people over here. I'm going to need people over here. And the thing about people is that what I discovered long ago is that it doesn't matter whether it's finance, engineering, marketing. The attitude you require in this space is very different from the attitude you require in this space, which is very different from the attitude you require in this space. And so I called this, gave this a name, Pioneers one of these days, Lee, you're going to have to teach me how to draw. I said this. And sound planners. And it's possible to create adaptive structures which mix aptitudes like engineering, finance, and marketing with attitudes such as pioneers, settlers, town planners. And there's a wonderful document which was released by GCHQ, and that's our intelligence services. And it's all Creative Commons, called Boiling Frogs. And so if you just search online Boiling Frogs, GCHQ, you'll find a wonderful document, and you'll see within it are hidden elements of this structure. I mean, well, they reference me directly anyway. So it's possible to use maps to anticipate where things are going to change and the types, what sort of skills you're going to need and the types of people that you're going to need. The other thing I like most about maps is the use of them to overcome inertia. So I had this one particular government. We knew things were going from product to more commodity, but we had resistance. And we had resistance to change because the organization hadn't given a pathway for those whose area was going to disappear. By using the maps, it was possible to create a new path for them. So, yeah, there's quite a bit of stuff going on in this area with HR. The only thing I would warn is don't mess around with this stuff. Things like culture and organization change, everybody jumps for those. And my general advice is stick a million miles away from them. There's a list of 40 doctrine, basic doctrine, things like focus on users, focus on user needs, etc. To remove bias and duplication, challenge assumptions, have a common language. Get those sorted first before you mess with organizational structure and before you even contemplate messing with things like culture. Because most people are, you know, it's like they're on a Titanic. There's a great big hole. And rather than fixing the hole, what they're doing is they're doing a reorg of the deck chairs because that will save us, or let's have a happy spirit because that'll, no, fix the hole. And the hole is usually the principle. So you'll find there's a table online with about 40 of them. Do those first. I just noticed it's 11 o'clock. I'm happy to continue chatting for a bit longer, but I thought this was finishing at 11.
Yeah, I mean, if people have got a few more questions, then yeah, I guess not a hard stop from my side either. So yeah, happy to be flexible.
Yeah, I'm good to talk. I have to drop. Thanks for your time today, Si. It was a real pleasure. Style is personal. The message is clear. Oh, Lee, you are so lovely. Phil, pleasure, Phil, but you had to run. At what point do you bring the people change required? Well, once you've mapped and applied those patterns, you worked out where it needs to go. I mean, you know, that's the point when you should be looking at that. Was Dominic trapped by context when he when he should have gone to Barnard Castle? Yeah, let's not talk about Dominic. Hope to be in touch soon, Leo. Pleasure always. Oh well, okay. Well, look. In which case, suddenly my chat window has just appeared. I don't know why that disappeared. All I'm going to say is, sorry, my picture of all people. Is all I'm going to say. Thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting. And you know, if you do, I've been drawing these for a SAS. Do you have a measure as to how far left and right to put a point between the marks? Oh, that's a good one. Right. So the access itself actually comes from analysis of publications, about 9,000 odd publications. 9,223, not that it's a number I remember. And those publications, what I did was I took the characteristics, common characteristics from each of these stages. So like the Genesis custom built product commodity are just labels for stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I took the common reoccurring text describing characteristics from each of those stages and put it into something called the cheat sheet. So what you do with the cheat sheet, and you can find it online, is you often look at something and start going through, ask questions. What is the market like? Is it, novel and new? Is it ubiquitous, etc. Basic things like that. And you start just marking off each of the characteristics, and then you use that to anticipate or to judge roughly which stage it's in. Now, here's the tricky bit, the problem with it. The axis at the bottom actually comes from that piece of work I did on publication types, which created a graph, or a map, a graph, which was ubiquity versus certainty of an activity, which has those different stages, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in. And in reality, what that means, because one of the axes is certainty, is that you cannot say precisely where something is until it's become a commodity. Once the thing has become a commodity, you can accurately say where it was. But until it becomes a commodity, the best you can do is cheat the system, which is why you use the cheat sheet. And the point about this is, unfortunately, maps just show you a landscape. They are not a crystal ball for change. They don't guarantee things. So people often want to know, well, when is this thing going to precisely become a commodity? In order to do that, we have to use weak signals, and we have to cheat, and that's imprecise. So the answer to your question is, how can you accurately say where something is? Yes, but only once it's become a commodity. Perfectly execute. I have to shoot off. Pleasure as always. So absolute. Thank you, Lee. That's an absolute delight and wonderful to see Lee on the call. Right, if there is no more questions.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Simon. Really appreciate you making the time. I think it's a really good question.
Sorry for all the technology hassles and because literally for people join the call. I mean, it must be half an hour before, well, about an hour beforehand, my MacBook, the battery decided to die. And of course, which meant it's not charging at all. So I was facing, I managed to get this Windows machine up and running, but I've got no video, got no microphone or anything like that. But at least I've got a tablet I can use on it, and I've got I can present slides. But it was all fun and games. There we are. Now I've got to go and work out what am I going to do with the rest of my day to try and get all of this stuff running. Lots of fun. There we are.
Yeah. Well, no, thanks again. There's a few things you mentioned there about kind of links which people can go to find out more information on maps and how to get started. Would you be able to just whiz me a few links that I can share with the group in like a follow-up email?
Well, let me go Wardley Maps. So Medium Wardley Maps is the book. Hang on a second. Let me. I'm on a Windows machine. Oh, hang on a second. Stop sharing. Let's get something else. And I've got a big old clunky keyboard as well. Right. Copy. It's list.wardleymaps, but you can. That just takes you to this GitHub repository here.
Excellent.
And if you look at that, it's got quick start guides, community, basic reading, videos, courses, maps in the wild, research papers, templates, tools, events, meetups, I mean, it's like, wow, this started off as something that, I was doing. I found it useful. And of course, I made a Creative Commons share alike, and I was always, but I just assumed everybody else in the world knew how to do this. I hadn't done an MBA, and therefore, this is obviously what you learn at MBAs, how to map landscapes and things like that. So it took me at least 6 years to discover that, no, you learn SWOT diagrams. Like, what? How much they charge you? So, and of course, no, the joke is, my stuff is being taught on some of these courses now. But, it took me quite a few years to realize. It was actually in a conversation with Liam Maxwell. We had a problem with a particular government department, and I simply mapped it out and said, look, that's the problem. And Liam turned to me and said, that's really good, what's that? And I said, well, what do you mean, what's that? And that thing you've just drawn, there's a map. And Liam's an old friend, and it was just like, sure you knew how to map? And he was like, no. And this must have been 2011 or something like that. And at that point, I realized, oh, God, better start telling people a bit more detail.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
And Hector, so yeah, absolutely. So what we can do is share that with the group as well. And then, Simon, I mean, if you're comfortable with this, pop it onto our Leaders in Tech YouTube channel as well.
So the answer to that is, it's all Creative Commons share alike. You can record it, you can edit it, you can do what you like, put it online, perfectly fine. So, as long as you don't edit it in a way that you take a word from here and a word from here and a word from here and get me sounding like I'm, as long as you edit it so it's an interesting story. I'm perfectly fine. I'm not one of, people ask, editorial control, things like that. No, I believe I take a very open approach to everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks again. Really, really appreciate you making the time. And yeah, we'll go ahead and kind of share those links with the group afterwards.
Yep. Pleasure. Thank you. As usual, I've got far more slides than I can possibly show in a time, but we've overrun, and I know many have had to disappear. Paul Chambers as well. Gosh, you've got so many good names on this. Oh, blimey. But all I'm going to say is thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. All right, thanks so much, Simon. Really appreciate that.
That's all right. Take care.